Yes.
Thank you. Professor Manus, these questions have come from a variety of legal representatives, so they will address a number of the issues we've discussed. First of all, you touched on some of the reasons why you don't think prioritisation in the national scheme should be given to those infected by blood or blood products. But could you explain in full what your concerns are about introducing such a prioritisation?
So many people live with chronic liver disease. There are many people walking around today who have chronic liver disease from many causes who would never need a liver transplant and who are very, very stable with their disease. And they will decompensate when things happen to them, like they get an infection or they have trauma. Something that changes may tip the balance for them. But there are many, and actually we probably don't know how many people have chronic liver disease. You could get it from many things. Non-A, non-B, non-C, non-D, non-E, non-F, non-G hepatitis. We don't even know if it exists. There's some diseases out there that could produce chronic liver disease. So really the reason for liver transplant, so don't forget, a liver transplant has quite a lot of risk to it. And at the moment, the accepted risk is 9% mortality at the end of 1 year. The first 3 months, most patients do relatively well. But as the year goes on, the attrition rate increases. And some years, it's worse than others. And depending on the liver people get, the mortality could be higher. If it's acute liver failure, the mortality is close to 33%. So that means they come in for a liver transplant, they don't leave hospital in 33% of cases. So although it's a great advance in medical science, it comes with a lot of risk. So we have to always balance the risk. And we also have to consider that there's some patients who can't wait, and there's some patients who can wait. And it's our role to make sure we have that balance right. And so when patients are infected with hepatitis B, C, whatever the cause of their liver disease is, it's about the change in their stability. Vast majority of patients with hepatitis C, and actually when hepatitis C was first thought about, they thought it wasn't an important disease. We only realized how important it was as time went on. But a lot of patients are stable with their disease, and they can live and die from something totally different. What our role is to make sure that when they start to deteriorate, there's systems in place to capture that and treat them. And we believe we have that system. Now, if you start looking at other ways of prioritizing people, what can you do? Well, you could say, well, everyone who was infected with, in the way that they got infected, which is appalling, and I wish it was different, but we just put them at the top of the list. They all go to the top of the list. We've got chronic hepatitis C with cirrhosis, and you got this through infected blood. You should be put at the top of the list and get a liver transplant. Well, we'd be killing half of those patients for no reason. There's absolutely no reason to do that. Okay, well, let's put the patients who deteriorate on the top of the list. The problem with doing that is that patients deteriorate at different rates, and the whole country has to be considered. There are lots of treatments, and as much as what happened was appalling, there are lots of other treatments that NHS give patients that cause liver failure. And so how do we deal with that? So what happens with, the young man who got antibiotics for his upper respiratory tract infection and ends up with liver failure? What happened to the lady who had breast cancer treatment and ended up with liver failure and needing liver? Do you ignore them? I mean, how do you deal with that? So the way we did it was to say, take out the emotion and put it into the disease. If the liver is deteriorating to the point where it needs to be transplanted, those patients, there's a system in place to identify them and give them the priority. And that's what we believe we have. Now, in the US, they give extra points. So and the problem with that system is they run into this problem of how many points do you give? Because they have a different system. They don't have a national system. They have a regional system, and they have a number of centers that join together. But they keep adding points, and it becomes a big argument amongst all the centers. And I worked in the US for 5 years, and I know what it's like. And it's not the system that we think is equitable and is the right system for the UK. And we work so closely together that I believe this is the right system.
In terms of the cohort that was used for the modelling for the scheme, you talked about it being over a 4-year period. Why was that used when you have a consideration of a 5-year survival period?
Well, I think it was, to be absolutely honest, I can't remember why, because I wasn't the person who made those decisions. I was part of the working group. So there was a working group which was called the Liver Allocation Working Group, and out of that came in-loss. The person who actually ran that is now retired, but I think it was based on conversations they had with the statisticians about the fullness of the data, and they felt that from 2010 to then they had the most complete data, and that's how I think it came about, to be honest.
In relation to the monitoring committee, you explained that they'd originally met every 3 months, then every 6 months, and then the issues were noticed, which you've described. How often does the committee meet now?
So at the standing meetings are 6 monthly, but any time there's a need for a change, they meet 3 monthly to monitor it. So since the change now, they're back to 3 months.
And in terms of marginal livers, you've explained that this is a very difficult issue for the patient. Is there any process in place which allows an element of advanced decision making so that the decision is easier?
For the patient?
For the patient.
Well, we have on the website, there's a huge amount of information. So in the consenting process, there's 3 levels of information for patients. So there's the basic information that the vast majority of patients want, because a lot of patients don't want to be overloaded with too much detail. So that's level 1, and tells you about the types of livers, the types of donors, and the potential outcomes. Then there's level 2, which takes that into more detail, and then level 3 goes into a lot of detail, and we'll talk about what happens with livers that are what's called extended criteria. These are livers that you have to think about a little more carefully. We also talk now about machine perfusion, so those livers now are being considered for a little bit of rejuvenation, although that is not completely sorted and there are lots of trials going on. The future will look different, but the information is there for patients to read. What I find is that you can't overload the patients too much, so you have to give it. I mean, consenting for this procedure is a process. It's not something you just put someone on a chair in front of you and say, this is what's going to happen, bam, bam. You can't do that because it just confuses people. So the process we've told all units to use, and we have a national process, is that they get given information before they attend their very first clinic visit to consider liver transplant. We now have a film on the website that they can watch, and it goes through all the stages of what happens. They then come to the clinic and be seen by a coordinator who is a specialist nurse in organ transplant, who will go through everything again with them. Then they will see the consultant, who will talk about the technical aspects, and they will be given information and go home and allowed to read the information or go on the website and go through that, and then they come back. That's before any consent is taken, and go through a process of have you understood and some centres, which I've encouraged to do what's called teach back, so they ask questions and then the consent is signed. And the consent is signed way ahead of the transplant. So at any stage, patient can change their mind. They can say, I don't want extended criteria on marginal organ. But then, as the longer they're on the list, they could change their mind at any time. So yes, I want to be considered for that.
So within the consent process, there is a discussion about whether to have
Everything is
extended-
listed. If they want DCD, non-DCD, if they want half a liver, a full liver, a machine perfused liver, it's all on the consent form. Because that's all very material, it's a material risk to them, and they need to know about it.
And finally, it's been suggested that some people have developed hepatitis C or amyloidosis after being transplanted with livers. What's your understanding of that?
Developed de novo hepatitis C. I mean, in other words, they got a new infection of hepatitis
Indeed.
C. I mean, that could happen to anybody. Having hepatitis C from a donor, so infection can be what's called de novo, so it can appear from like anyone, sporadic. You can get hepatitis C from being in contact with someone who's had hepatitis C or blood from a hepatitis C patient, which is be extremely rare now. I don't think it would ever happen. That's very rare. I mean, I'm not sure we have a lot of information on that. Getting hepatitis C from a donor who's had hepatitis C, now we have a program in place where you can accept an organ from a hepatitis C donor. And NHS England have agreed the funding for the medication. So if you don't have hepatitis C, but there's a donor who's really young and hasn't got chronic liver disease, and the organ is suitable for transplant, then you get the organ and you get the treatment, the prophylaxis to prevent hepatitis C. And that's a 12-week treatment. I mean, that is a program which currently I think we've had about certainly under 50 patients receive those organs. It's close to 20, I think. But it is a program that all liver units have signed up to. We do it for all organs, including kidneys, and all those patients get treated. They get prophylactic treatment with the most current DAA.
And would such organs be classified as marginal?
Yeah. So that would be marginal on the basis that they could get hepatitis C from that. I mean, the program in the States has been going for a while, and very few patients have developed any chronic problems. We started relatively recently, about 18 months ago. We haven't had lots of patients done, but they're being monitored. So every liver advisory group, those patients who received those livers are discussed and looked at their outcome. And so far, it's all been good.
Thank you. There's no further questions from the recognised legal representatives. Sir, do you have any questions?
Well, I have two small questions, both of which arise out of the answers you've just given. Right. The first was, I think you told us that in a usual liver transplant, patients might do very well for the first month, but you had to look at it really in the longer term, and 9% mortality would occur after a year. And you told us that in the cases of acute liver failure, it was likely to be about 33% mortality. When you came to discuss the question of prioritization for people who had hepatitis C as a result of infected blood, you said that giving them a transplant without there being first decompensation and if, as it were, be treated as the usual candidate for transfusions, you said you might be killing half of them. Now, was that just a figure? Did I hear you say that? Was that
No,
a figure of speech?
Yeah. What I meant was, if we said patients with hepatitis C who got it from blood transfusion, as we're talking about now, and even if they had chronic liver disease, if they were stable, say that they had no features of decompensation, or even didn't know they had much chronic liver disease, or were found to have cirrhosis, but so what? And we put them all on a waiting list. What I said was there'd be a group of those patients who we'd actually do a disservice to because they actually don't need a liver transplant, and we put them at risk because a liver transplant comes with mortality, and it was just a figure of speech. We'd kill half of them. I didn't mean we'd kill half of them.
Well, that's what I was.
No, I didn't mean that.
thought
It would be
fairness
just
to you, we better just clarify that.
No, that was just a figure of speech.
I thought it probably was. It was an overstatement to support your
that's
case,
right.
as
Yeah,
it were.
no. Sorry.
No, that's all right. The second is also something to do with the words you used. You talk about consent being taken. Shouldn't consent be given? And the two words might represent different ends of the same process, but they might actually represent rather different concepts.
Well, consent's given by the patients. Consent's taken by us. Yeah, we take the consent, they give the consent.
You shouldn't take it, you should have it given by the patient, shouldn't you?
It's always given by the patient, and as I said, it's a process, so we don't, we give patients a lot of time to consider their options and whether they want to give consent.
Well, thank you.
I didn't mean we went and took it.
No, it's a descriptive word which may indicate a thought about the process. And I fully understand why consent is necessary, and it may be necessary to record it for really practical reasons. But the consent has to be a reality, hasn't it, in the light of the information given to the patient?
It is, yeah. I mean, to be honest, for surgery, if patients turn up for the operation, that is, they're giving consent to have the surgery. We document the consent
well, they may
by
not
writing
be.
it down.
It depends what they've been told about it.
But that's why we make it such a point of making sure that it's done in a structured way, and that all units are doing it in the same way, and that all the information is given, so that when the document is signed, it's signed because they're saying they've understood everything they've read, they know why they've been given this information, and they understand that a liver transplant is probably the recommended treatment for their condition, and that's why they sign the document.
Well, thank you. That's all that I ask.
Professor Mannis, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I mean, just to say that, if we had enough organs for everybody, systems may change, but at the way things are, we have to ration the scarce resource we have for the most needy patients. And the only way we can do that is to base it on deteriorating liver function. And I think, compared to anywhere in the world, we have the fairest, most statistically accurate system available, to the point where actually a lot of other countries are looking at the way we've done it. And it has taken a lot of people a lot of years to put it in place. And this wasn't done, because we thought we'd be clever. This was done because we wanted to make sure we were doing the right thing for the patients with chronic liver disease. So I firmly believe it's the right system.
Well, can I thank you, Professor, for coming here and spending your time to tell us about the transplant system. It will be of very great interest to many people who are listening and helps aid, certainly my understanding of how things are done. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So might we take a short break before we hear from Professor Roberts?
Yes, so we come back at 12:15.
Thank you.
12:15.